What's up, STS Nation, and welcome to another episode of Surviving the Survivor, the podcast that promises to bring you the very best guests in true crime. And we've got a packed and powerful panel tonight, so thank you for joining us. Of course, as most of you know, Bryan Kohberger was in court today, choosing to quote unquote stand silent. So the judge entered a not guilty plea on his behalf, and the trial date is now set for October 2nd at 8:30 a.m. We'll discuss what this all means and what standing silent is all about. Of course, police say that the killer is 28-year-old Bryan Christopher Kohberger. We want to remind everyone that Bryan Kohberger is presumed innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. Best guess, you're in for a treat today. Tara Malik is an Idaho licensed attorney practicing in state and federal court in business and commercial litigation. She has experience in both civil and criminal law and is she's a big part of the show. She's here frequently, so we welcome her back. And then you've got the legendary Sheryl Mac McCollum. We will call her Mac. She is an Emmy Award winning crime scene investigator from CBS 46's CSI Atlanta. She is also the director of the Cold Case Investigative Research Institute. She's also a writer from CrimeOnLine. She's a forensic and crime scene expert for Crime Stories with Nancy Grace. And she's also a crime scene investigator for Metro Atlanta PD. She holds a master's degree in criminal justice with an emphasis on policing. And she's also, if that was not enough, co-authored the textbook Cold Case Pathways to Justice. I'm not sure how she gets anything done because she does so much, but nevertheless, she is here. And then the voice of reason, the man with experience, Jim Van Allen. He is a certified profile and an experienced threat and risk assessment specialist. He has over 31 years of experience in law enforcement and investigations. He was with the Ontario Provincial Police, 15 of which were spent managing the OPP Criminal Profiling Unit. And certainly last but not least, first time on the show with all those law books behind her is Edwina Elcox. She is a criminal defense attorney from Boise as well. She's been practicing criminal law for the majority of her career and has experience as both a prosecutor and defense attorney. And you might recognize the face. She previously represented Lori Vallow Daybell. So thank you all. A couple of quick announcements. Please follow us on Facebook, Insta, Twitter. We are a podcast STS. You can support us on Patreon. You can become a YouTube member. And the merch store is now linked on YouTube. As I like to start all these shows, please remember the victims. Of course, we've got Madison Mogan, 21, Kaylee Gonzalez, 21, whose family issued a statement today, and we will get to that. We've got Xana Kernodle, 20, and Ethan Chapin, also 20 years old. Before we get started, the Gonzalez family did issue a statement basically saying that they would like to thank everyone for continuing to follow the case and keep the memories of all these victims alive, saying that they are what is important and not the defendant. So they want us to focus, obviously, on these victims. And they say that this is just the beginning of a long journey for all the families, and they are thankful for the continued support and coverage. So obviously the big news of the day, Tara Malik, we saw Bryan Kohberger in court today. We've seen him in that Latah County courtroom before, wearing the orange jumpsuit. When asked for his plea to the counts, Bryan Kohberger remained silent. His attorney rose and said, "Your Honor, we are standing silent." What does that mean?
Well, he has a statutory right to do so. Instead of entering a plea of guilty or not guilty, he can stand silent, and then what happens is it defaults to a not guilty that the court enters on his behalf. Does it really change anything as far as the procedure? It doesn't. We're still going to go on to the next step, which is the exchange of discovery between the parties. But that's really what we saw today.
And Edwina, were you surprised by that at all, being an attorney yourself, that he chose to quote unquote stand silent and instead of, pleading himself?
No, not really. We have this extremely unique situation that is few and far between, and the vast majority of criminal death penalty is on the table. And we know that this 60-day timeline starts running. And so where we don't know by and large if there's an offer on the table or if there is ongoing negotiations, it's kind of like a legal fallacy, right? He's not entering a plea, but by standing silent, he is theoretically preserving his ability to negotiate and coming back and saying, I didn't enter a not guilty plea. We know that the judge is going to do it on his behalf, but they have the 60-day timeline where the defense has to consider whether or not the death penalty is going to be on the table or not, which is, I can't imagine a more legally significant consideration.
And we'll get to the meat and potatoes of that 60-day clock in just a moment. But Jim Van Allen, to you, he was reported up close as smiling quite a bit with his attorneys, nodding at times. Linda Feldman, hello from not so sunny LA. I think the sun forgot about us. We're spoiled. Happy Monday, gearing up for Memorial Day weekend. When I saw today's photo, my first thought was, how dare he smile? Jim Van Allen, take us into the mind of Bryan Kohberger on a day like today when the world is watching him and his behavior in that courtroom.
I don't know that there's really all that much you can say about Bryan smiling at his attorney. It's probably, he knows he's being watched. He's trying to portray himself maybe as pleasant and cooperative with his lawyer. A lot of people can second guess that reaction given the gravitas of what he's charged with. In one respect, although he is not required to say anything, he didn't say anything. Somebody is trying to arraign me on 4 counts of first-degree murder. I'm going to say something like, I plead innocent. I didn't do it. I'm not the guy. I'm going to proclaim my innocence at every step from the arrest right through. And he's sort of damned if he does, damned if he doesn't at this point, if he smiles at his attorney. But I think we're going to see a lot of social awkwardness and perhaps deficits from Bryan as the trial plays out.
And Mac, to you, again, he was in the courtroom smiling at times, at other times just staring ahead. The other person who was staring at him apparently was Steve Gonzalez. Kaylee's father was apparently staring a hole through him. He said he would be a pit bull. He would be there. When you're investigating a crime scene, which you still do, and it looks like you're in your police jacket right now, how much consideration are you giving to the victims and their families as you're working a case?
Well, that's who you're working for. I mean, you're definitely entering that crime scene with that victim in mind, and you're trying to get a sense of who they were in this case and what you can piece together as to what happened, and then what evidence that you can get that points to the perpetrator. I think it's really important that both sides are represented in all these, hearings and trials. I think it's important for the defendant to be there with his counsel. I think it's important for the victims' families to be there. And the most important thing you've already done tonight, you have 2 brilliant attorneys that calmly and rationally and with some good horse sense explained what today was. Some people saw that headline and just freaked out. There's no reason to freak out. This is a play that he's completely cool to do. I mean, he has every right to do what he did today and stand silent. And again, the daddies had every right to be there and stare a hole in him. It's what is exactly supposed to happen.
I love the Southern accent. We're going to get back to the attorneys in just one second, but Jim, to you, do you expect gamesmanship from Bryan Kohberger like we saw today? Maybe he instructed his attorneys that he's gonna stand silent. Does any of that surprise you? Do you think that he is, you know, eager to kind of present his defense his way? And do you even think that his own attorneys might be struggling with his personality?
No, I don't think he's going. Well, I think they're going to struggle in some degree in terms of finding common ground, communicating well with him. But he's not a game player. He's not a showboat. He's not a psychopath. Probably, I would say that for a defense attorney, the hardest defendant client to defend would be a psychopath, because they're going to do what they want anyways. I've seen psychopaths that you couldn't keep off the witness stand because they demand their time in the limelight. But I don't see Bryan Kohberger as being that guy at all. I think he's going to take instruction from his counsel, and if he's smart, he will. And I don't know if I would predict he wouldn't even take the stand, but we'll have to wait and see how the trial unfolds, because there's a lot of strategizing that goes into that decision during the trial.
And Jim, you just said what he isn't, and I know we're a society of labels. So what would you label him?
I would say, from what I've seen, from what I've heard on media, that he's shy, introverted, and an inadequate young man with lower than average social skills.
Jim doesn't mess around.
Who made horribly, horribly bad decisions.
Yeah. And to that point, Sally Vella brings up an interesting question right off the bat. Jim Van Allen, does Canada think Bryan might have committed crimes there, being so close to the border? Is that a possibility? Do you think he has committed crimes before, though? I guess that's the bigger question.
The answer to your first part of the question is yes, Canadian police would be very aware of this case, and it's very easy for us with a computerized crime linkage analysis system to structure a number of queries to look for similar behavior, similar MO. They've got his DNA. That no doubt could be shared from the US to Canadian police. But I'm sorry, the second part of your question, Joel?
Do you think he's committed crimes before?
If he's committed crimes, it was nothing of this nature. A lot of criminal careers are evolutionary, just like journalist careers, police careers, and legal careers. You start doing the learning, then you start doing, and you do little stuff. Then you're trusted with more important stuff. You gain experience and insight into your craft, and you pursue more complex and serious matters. Criminals are the same way. They start off committing, generally, little crimes that are building blocks of skills that lead them up to big, more serious crimes. Some people come out of the gate committing serious crimes, homicide, and that's their first crime. We see that all the time. But I would not expect Mr. Kohberger to have previous crimes of this nature in his history.
And Edwina, Iris Hewlett weighing in already. I have a question. Isn't it his right, which Tara alluded to stand silent? In my opinion, it is also a well-planned strategic move by his defense. Do you agree with that? Is there a legal strategy, a mechanism behind what they are doing when they were in court this morning?
And sorry, I lost connection there for a moment. So is that question to me?
Yeah, it's to you. Yes.
I mean, I don't think that it is. I think that there's a lot of emphasis placed on this. Like, he stood silent. He's not taking accountability, or he's not standing on his of innocence. But I think that we know that there is this outstanding discovery issue in this case. We know that per what the defense has filed, that they don't have, per their request, a lot of evidence that they need to properly advise their client in this case. So I don't think it's a gamesmanship issue. I think the public at large wanted to hear something one way or the other, which was almost assuredly, if it was going to be anything as far as a plea goes, was a not guilty plea. I don't think that anybody realistically could have expected him to enter a guilty plea at this point. But a case of this magnitude that is multi-jurisdictional, multi-agencies, where we know that there was a incredible amount of investigation before there was an arrest even made, I think that this was the smart move to make, because there can't be there could be the argument, but there can certainly be the flip side to that argument that he's, by entering a plea of not guilty, he's not taking accountability if it comes to that point, but he's standing silent. We know that the judge is going to enter a not guilty plea, but there is so much more that the defense attorneys have to get in this case and consider and have that discussion with their client.
Shout out to Marina in the south of Spain and Jennifer, Jersey Jen Castaldi, who said she had a couple of rough days. Hope you're feeling better, Jen. We've all been there, and I might be there right now, but it's all good. Tar Malik. So the judge entered not guilty pleas for him on all these charges, which was kind of interesting. What I'm curious about, Judge, I love the name, then asks the defendant, do you understand these charges? As an attorney, take us kind of behind the curtain. This is a guy that, he was coherent, obviously, in that traffic stop we saw in Pullman, Washington. But the levity of this case is it's a very heavy, high profile case. As the attorney, how do you ensure that he really understands what he is about to face?
Well, if you're representing anyone, you're going to, especially in this type of scenario, you're going to want to make sure that beforehand you're reading through the charges with your client. You're talking about, maximum and minimum sentences that could be imposed, the maximum minimum penalties. You're talking about what in this case, the indictment says, what it's alleging against him in each one of the counts. The reason those questions are asked, first of all, everything that you do in court is setting a record. And especially in a case where you've got significant charges like this, especially one with death penalty that may be on the table, you've got to make a really good record. Both the court does and both attorneys do, for purposes of just kind of preventing an appeal or setting up for an appeal, whatever that may be. And so when you ask the defendant, do you understand the charges against you? You're doing a couple of things. You're ensuring that their counsel has talked through these charges, that they didn't just get the charges and then not speak to their attorney about them or to their client about them. You're ensuring, it's one step of competence. You're making sure that they're present and they're aware of what's going on, what's happening to them. So it serves a couple of purposes here. It's a pretty routine and standard question to ask, but that's really the reason why it's asked.
Good explanation right there. Question for Mac. The questions are flowing in already. And it's interesting. How do you put evidence found outside, like the parking area above the house, and gather it thinking it is part of a crime scene, or would weather already contaminate it? And then I can't see the last part of it, but what about gathering that evidence from the outside? And if you guys recall, there was a moment in time where a former detective thought he found a glove after police had already scoured the area, and there was all kinds of questions about that. But Mac, the question is teed up for you.
Well, for me, it always starts outside before we get inside. And the reason is that person had to park somewhere, had to walk from somewhere, had to leave in a hurry from the scene. So outside is real important. So I'm going to be looking for gloves, blood drops, weapons possibly, gloves, footprints, anything that I think could be associated with that home, tire tracks that the killer entered and exit. They've got to tell me the story. So the story absolutely starts outside for me. How did they gain entry? How did they gain an exit? Did they enter from the door and then jump off the balcony? I want to know all of it. So that's where I'm going to start for sure. As far as something being in the weather, it really depends on what it is. And the short answer is, if you've got something that's like a bloody knife and it's raining, I mean, that's short-lived evidence. But if it's something like a glove that he's taken off and maybe inside out, some of that could still be preserved, even if it's in the snow. Sometimes the snow may help preserve something a lot more because it's going to, make it cold and keep a biological specimen. So for me, outside is the ticket. So from the minute I get out of my car, I'm taking pictures immediately.
Mac, if you can, try to flip your phone on its side. If you can't, no worries. No worries. Meanwhile, there we go. We want to see more of you. There we go. It's awesome. Thank you. Appreciate that. So, Edwina, to you, we were covering Lori Vallow here from gavel to gavel, and I know you represented her for a time. What kind of added pressure is there in such a high-profile case with such a high-profile defendant? And feel free to share a Lori Vallow story if you want.
I think that might have been me again, and I don't know what the connection issue is, but it like freezes at the most inopportune time.
Sorry about that.
No. What was the question?
Just what it's like to represent such a high-profile defendant. You were representing Lori Vallow for a time. What kind of added pressure is it?
I mean, to say that there is not awareness about the high-profile nature of a case, the media scrutiny would be completely disingenuous. But for me, the constitutional rights, the right to, it doesn't matter the profile of the case, because every defendant, every person, every citizen in this country is entitled to the same constitutional rights, the presumption of innocence, and the absolute right to have a defense in their case. The reality is that a case like this becomes high profile because of the underlying just inherent tragedy of it, but the level of defense is going to be significantly more than just your standard, DUI case or petty theft case, because there is going to be so much more evidence from various agencies across state lines. And so you can't, you have to be prepared to meet that, to be able to digest the voluminous evidence, and then decide what the best route to give your client the best defense in the cases. Every person has the same constitutional rights that are inherently important to fight for and uphold. But the reality is a case of this significance, even if you take the media scrutiny out of it, is going to require you to summit a tremendous defense and a tremendous amount of work time, manpower to just get through it all so you can figure out where you're going and have the requisite conversation with your client.
Tara, to you, the trial is set now for October 2nd, and it's expected to last 6 weeks. Do you think it's really going to start then? And is that enough lead time for both sides to prepare a case of this magnitude?
I mean, the short answer to your question is no, it doesn't seem like enough lead time to me at all. I was surprised by how, short of a time it was set. It was set for that October date. But the reason it was set that quickly was because Bryan Kohberger did not waive his right to a speedy trial. Mm-hmm. So all defendants have a right to a speedy trial. That means he has to be tried within 6 months. And so the clock starts ticking. His counsel, Ann Taylor, had requested that the trial be set at the outer kind of boundaries of that 6-month period of time, which is how they came to the October date. And I believe that the state also stipulated to that date. So unless he waives his right to a speedy trial, that's what it's looking like right now. But given the nature of this case and what we know so far, and we certainly don't know everything, but what we know so far with the way that law enforcement pieced together and the evidence to get to Kohberger, it seems rather fast to me, because it's going to have a lot of moving parts. A lot of foundation has to be laid, especially for the tracking information. I'm sure Mac knows the ins and outs of it. But when you're using like cell phone tower pings and all of that, you're going to have experts testify how they put that together, what that technology means. You're going to have to convince the jury that that is reliable technology to trace it back to him. So, and then the other part of it is, it sounds like defense doesn't have, which is not surprising, they don't have all the discovery yet. So they still have to go through that. And then they have to get through, expert disclosures on both sides. So it is fast approaching that date.
And Tara, right back to you, the Prosecutors Podcast with Alice and Brett. That's awesome. You guys should check it out if you haven't. They've been on the show. Brett tweeted out, and he went to Harvard Law School, which and the other one went to Yale. So they're pretty bright people. And he tweeted out today, he said, I'm going to bet, this is him talking, that they are going to put in writing that they're seeking the death penalty, and the trial will then be moved to closer to April 2024. Does that sound pretty realistic in your estimation?
Yeah, very likely. If the death penalty is on the table, obviously that's, worst case scenario for Kohberger in this situation. It requires a ton more work. Not that this doesn't already, but yeah, I could definitely see if the state indicates that they're going to be seeking the death penalty here, that those dates are surely going to be moved out. The stakes are way too high at that point in time to try and be prepared with an October date.
And we're going to get into some of the profiling with Jim and Mac in just a moment. But Edwina, back to you. What is the process now that the state is dealing with? How do they figure out? Do they already know if they're going to seek the death penalty? Who talks to whom? And how does this all play out?
So this is a situation where I wish I had a crystal ball. The reality is, under Idaho law and Idaho Constitution and the statutes, they're under the Victims' Rights Act, the prosecutor has to be having a conversation with the victims' families. Now, does that mean the victims' families get the ultimate say in the case as what happens? No. But they have to be having those conversations, and they're entitled to be heard. The reality is, when it's a death penalty case, the appellate process becomes so much more lengthy, so much more involved. And really, those families don't get a reprieve at the end of the day, some finality, because it becomes an ongoing, virtually, there's some end, but virtually never ending. So I think that I don't think that they're having those conversations. I know that they're having those conversations because they're required to by Idaho law. So it's the state, the prosecution is gathering their evidence. They're figuring out what their case flaws may be, and whatnot. And if there is an offer that they can make that may not be desirable, but is palatable, so they get pleas to likely the first-degree murder charges. I can't imagine a situation in which the prosecution wouldn't be saying, hey, we'll take a plea to a lesser offense. We have 4 victims here. The big carrot, as everybody knows, is taking the death penalty off the table, but they have to have those conversations with the victims' families.
And Jim Van Allen, is Bryan Kohberger the kind of guy who's going to, at the last moment, say, I will plead guilty to first-degree murder because I'm a coward and I don't want to be put to death?
Can't go there, Joel. That's a big step to take. I think he's going to try and benefit from his counsel's advice. I think he's going to play it out. I think he's a very cautious individual. To some extent, obviously, there was some allegedly pretty impulsive acting going on here. But yeah, I think he's going to play it out slowly and talk to his family, talk to his counsel, and weigh it out himself and go for the best deal. I mean, he's not a stupid man.
And Mac, you know criminals well. What's your take on that? Do you think there's a last minute, from him where he's really contemplating, okay, I could be put to death, so let me just plead guilty? You think he could, back out of the tough guy act at the last minute?
I haven't really seen a tough guy act from him. And I think he is now uber aware of what his situation is. He's been incarcerated long enough that he understands what general population is. He understands what a private cell, if he is convicted under the death penalty, would mean. And he's going to weigh both of those, and he's going to understand them completely. He's going to know if he gets back-to-back life sentences, what that means. He's also going to know, what does a death penalty mean when you incorporate your, appeals. So either way, he's looking at 25 years before anything happens. He's going to know that. And I think he's going to factor everything in about what his day-to-day life would truly become.
And Tara, do you think the defense team is already talking to him? The clock has started ticking now, but is his defense team explaining to him, hey, you might want to consider taking a plea deal. We'll work on it to escape this death penalty? Is that something that they are already discussing?
I'm sure it's part of the conversation, but if they don't have all the discovery yet, if they don't have all the materials that the state has in their possession from the investigation, it's really hard to advise your client and say, hey, let's consider taking a plea deal right now. I mean, like I said, there's going to be pieces that the prosecution is going to have to put into place to, kind of build this case moving forward beyond a reasonable doubt and convince these jurors. And there are opportunities to poke holes, and a good defense attorney is going to poke holes. One of the big questions, I think, in this case is, why would he have done this? What's the motive? Even though motive is not an element of the crime at all, people on juries are like the rest of us. They want an explanation to explain why this situation happened, or, why it's likely, or, convince me that this person committed the crime. And if you don't have an explanation of why, that could be problematic for them. So, that might be an area that the defense is already exploring and looking for, patterns or non-patterns in the evidence that they receive.
Only one person knows the answer, and that's Jim Van Allen. Why, Jim? Why did he do this?
Well, this could be a book. All criminal activity is reward-based. I don't get out of bed in the morning unless there's a point to it. We go to our jobs because we like them, because they pay us money. Criminals commit crimes for different reasons: for profit, for personal cause, to express an underlying emotional need, for arousal, for excitement, for sexual gratification. Nobody does this on a lark. Some people want to know what killing feels like, but killing 4 people, this is so extreme in the terms of homicide, even for the United States that has so many mass murders. this is extreme to do it like this. So there is some reason the killer was going to be gratified by going in and doing it. And I certainly think that, and I have said since day one, because you have 3 female victims, you have to consider that there's a personal interest, possibly sexual-based interest or fantasy for going in there and ending 4 people's lives.
We've got Australia in the house, Scotland in the house, Canada in the house as a guest as well. So we've got the global audience in place. Edwina, to you, when does the state need to hand over all the discovery to the defense team so they can then decide which way to pivot?
Immediately. I mean, realistically, I don't mean to get like too legal rule based, but the defense files that are requests for discovery, that triggers the state's timeline. And, you know, to the defense credit, they've already filed a motion to compel at what would typically be a pretty early stage to do so. But these defense attorneys, and now Lisa, they are on top of it. They have what I would imagine is a pretty good command of what is out there. And they're saying, look, Judge, we're not wasting any time. We're not waiting for the state, the prosecution, to rest on their laurels and turn it over as they see fit. We're identifying what is out there, and we want it to give our client the best defense possible. So I commend them from being out in front of this, from doing what they can to demand that the state comply with its obligations. And frankly, you know, prosecutors, their ethical obligation is not to get a conviction, it's to do justice. So they should be getting everything to the defense attorneys as quickly as humanly possible, so they're not having to go in front of a judge pursuant to a motion to compel that has already been filed and explain why they haven't turned this evidence over.
That's the kind of thing that would get judge very angry if they're not turning the evidence over in a timely fashion, right?
I would sure hope so, because there's simply no reason for it. This isn't, prosecutors don't get to play hide the ball. They don't get to play, you know, discovery games. This is, when we're in the context of criminal law, we are talking about people's constitutional rights. Prosecutors, in my opinion, should have an open file policy and should be turning things over, seasonably supplement material as they're getting it out. And it shouldn't be, defense attorneys shouldn't be having to file motions to compel. But kudos to these defense attorneys for doing so and saying, we know this is out there, or theoretically out there, give it to us.
Special hello to Cindy Hollenbeck, who is a friend of the show, and she comes to us from the Moscow Pullman area, as does Papa Bear, who I've not seen tonight, but she's a frequent follower of the show. So special hello to both of them. Raul Thomas, Mac, he writes, he's following the BTK script. I know you know Kerry. Kerry is coming on our show Wednesday at 12:30 p.m. to discuss some of this. Do you buy this at all, that he's sort of following the BTK serial killer, otherwise known as Dennis Rader, otherwise known as the father of Kerry Rawson?
I don't think there's any question that he has had the opportunity to study more than one serial killer. I mean, early on, several of us talked about Ted Bundy. Several of us talked about, Kerry's father. And I think, when you're studying at the level that he was, he's already done his undergraduate, he's already gotten a master's, and now he's in a PhD program. He's well versed in some of these folks. But that's another reason that I don't believe he's got this trail of bodies anywhere, because he ain't no good at it. He used his own car. He's caught on video. His phone is pinging. He shuts his phone off during the murders. He's seen circling for 4 or 5 times before the murders, then speeding off after. He got a traffic ticket again, like Bundy. So there's mistakes that he made that if he had been somebody killing for 4 or 5 years, he would have gotten better. He would have made improvements. He didn't do that here. He got caught twice on a whisper stop. Come on now.
Mac, they say there's no such thing as a slam dunk case. Is this a slam dunk case?
It's as close as you're going to see in a They got his personal car, his personal phone. He's got traffic tickets. He's been stalking them. Even the guy at the vape shop knew these girls had a stalker. Not real good.
Jim, Sunshine Smiles, of all names, says he's really scary, vacant eyes, psychopath. You say he's not a psychopath. Is there anything as a profiler, do you ever read into the eyes? You always hear that as a descriptor. Is that something you look at?
I've seen, I mean, the eyes are the window to the soul. Eyes are part of the face that express inner emotions and thinking and other thoughts you might have, being surprised and things like that. I've seen some pretty cold eyes sitting across a table interviewing other people. I've seen crazy eyes as well that are consistent with somebody who's suffering a significant major mental illness. But vacant eyes, okay, vacant eyes, I'll give you that. Maybe lack of emotion. I said from day one that this case was strikingly unempathetic. When you can go in and do this to 4 people, empathy is out the window. So you're not going to expect warmness, affection, approachability from the facial expressions of somebody that would do this. But I can guarantee you, Bryan Kohberger is not a psychopath, and he is not following the playbook of BTK. They are totally different animals. BTK is a sexual sadist, and there was no indication of that in this particular crime scene. And this is not the work of a serial killer.
Jim Van Allen diminishing the work of Bryan Kohberger. Interesting to hear that. And I was just going to ask you about BTK, and you answered it. By the way, Miss Wheelassie, gone midnight in Scotland, but just have to listen to STS and their best guests, as I like to say. It's a better addiction than crack cocaine. Mac, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I mean, think about some of the killers that we've all understood and studied a little bit. When did they ever leave part of their, weapon at the scene? When did they leave their DNA at the scene? When did they leave a footprint? And all of these things that he did almost carelessly. This isn't somebody, that like Israel Keys that got comfortable. This was somebody that didn't know what he was doing.
Yeah, and the truth is, look, BTK, one of the only reasons he's in prison is he taunted the police and media. After 30-something years, right. He was sadly as good as it gets when it comes to committing those crimes, and probably would not have gotten caught if it were not for that. Jim, a couple people noted that Kohberger seemed to have some facial tics in the courtroom today. The feed that I saw was a smaller screen, tough to tell, but if he did in fact have facial tics, anything to read into that?
An arraignment on 4 counts of first-degree murder is probably going to make most people nervous to some degree. This is a big deal for anybody to be in that situation. It wouldn't be an outstanding observation to see nervousness on a defendant under these circumstances. I don't think he can make too much out of facial tics. Mm-hmm. During an interview, maybe a different story.
And what about this comment here from Rackmaster4? The guy is so guilty, he's loving the attention, a true narcissist. I think he expects to be convicted. That's why when he was first arrested, he said he'd be exonerated and not that I'm innocent. Jim, do you agree with this commenter?
The first sentence, I certainly do. This guy is so guilty. I don't believe that he's a true narcissist. I don't see that vibe coming from his personality. Does he expect to be convicted? The killer knows what he's done. Anybody that knows they've done this knows that you've got the combined talent of the local police, the state police, the FBI, the weight of law enforcement. That was a law enforcement dream team that they had on this investigation. And when they get disclosure, it's going to be a mountain of disclosure. Some of it might be refutable, but you can't argue away Mount Everest. And there's going to be a lot of stuff that's introduced that I think is going to be pretty compelling. So does he expect to be convicted? Maybe he's got that expectation.
Tara Malik, back to some sort of housekeeping with the court proceedings today. They were going to decide, of course, media, people like me with a podcast, were interested in cameras in there. And there was supposed to be some sort of decision on cameras as well as a gag order, but both of those are going to be addressed on June 9th per judge. And then Brian Enton, who's supposed to be on our program 12:30 p.m. Wednesday, he tweeted out that Judge, and I quote here, says that the AP Media Coalition needs to tone down their challenge to the gag order. It seems like kind of harsh language. I think it went all the way up to the Superior Court, but is the judge kind of staking his own ground here, marking his own territory in essence?
I think it's hard to jump into the mind of the judge and say exactly what he was thinking when he made that statement, but here I go. I think what he meant was that there's more than one side here, that this isn't the public has the ability and should have the ability to have this free flow of information and see these hearings. I think what he was trying to convey, and I don't believe that he's made a decision yet on that, but I think what he was trying to convey is just, there are multiple sides and considerations to this motion. We have to have a full hearing on it. We're going to set that out at a time where we can hear fully the arguments on both sides of it. But, I don't know that it's really signaling anything right now. I mean, I think the court is probably going to think really long and hard about it. Obviously, we just had the Vallow trial where there was no cameras in the courtroom. I'm sure that case is in the judge's mind as well. And, and again, this judge just received this case, right? We just bypassed the preliminary hearing, which was before a magistrate judge. Now there's an indictment, there was a grand jury proceeding, and now he's got it. So it's going to take a little bit of time for him to kind of get through all the briefing, think about it, consider the arguments on both sides before making a decision here.
And Edwina, there's going to be an evidentiary hearing on June 27th. What does that mean in plain English?
The judge is going to be deciding this motion and whether or not to grant the request. I mean, that's as simple as it is.
And is there any kind of constitutional right or right of the defendant to receive? Someone is asking if he's getting communications from his family, as in phone calls, friends, or can a judge block that sort of communication pending the trial?
So realistically, through jail communications, the Telmate system is typically what is used in Idaho. He's going to have the ability to communicate, whether it's text messages or phone calls, as long as he has money on his books to do so. Typically, the only conversations that are private in those situations are if an attorney's number is registered with the system. So they get a warning that these calls are being recorded. And so realistically, he's going to have the ability to communicate with his family. There's nothing, and I can't ever think of a situation in all my years where a inmate has had a complete ban on ability to communicate while in custody.
Stephanie Ella, a friend of the show here. I'd be curious to know what type of relationship Kohberger has with his mother. And I just started reading BTK's Confession of a Serial Killer. Mac, if you had a guess here, what would you say? And by the way, on the Dateline episode, which aired, which I'm trying to get to, and eventually we will, it might take 9 hours, there was some talk about how his sister believed that he was guilty ahead of his arrest, or was up to no good. But if you had a guess, Mac, what do you think this relationship is like with his, as you would say, with his mama?
Well, he's probably got some issues with mama. They typically do, all of them. But, it also has been my experience that the family knows. They can, say all that they want to about his intellect and, all the great things that he's done. But at some point they knew that he took a left somewhere and he was maybe not okay. When his dad, I think, flew out there and was driving across country with him, I think that's an unusual thing that occurred. And I think a lot more is going to come out of that. Why did that occur? When did they decide he was going to fly out and drive with him? I think a lot of people would think at that stage of your life, you wouldn't have your dad come out and drive with you. That's unusual.
And they took a very circuitous route on the way back.
And then when the police stopped, if you noticed, his dad took over answering questions. I mean, I've got 2 children in college. If somebody is talking to the 2 of us, I don't answer the question for them. They can answer what their life is like on campus. I don't have to interject. So it seems like there was a dynamic happening there as well. And again, I mean, most families that have somebody suffering, whether it's mental illness or substance abuse or whatever it is, the family knows. So I don't think there's going to be there may be a shock there that he actually murdered people if he's guilty and if he did this, but I don't think there would be any shock that he's not okay.
And by the way, his family was reportedly watching on a Zoom feed, which was only reserved for family members. They were not in the courtroom, from what we're being told. Jim, Jory wants to know, why on earth is Jim saying Kohberger is not a psychopath? We don't know that. And since Jim Van Allen is right here, I'm going to ask him, Jim, how do we know he's not a psychopath?
Well, we don't. For somebody to be judged a psychopath, he has to be examined by a qualified clinician who is qualified to identify the constellation of traits that is known as psychopathy. There are 20 different traits that can go up to somebody achieving a required score to be considered a psychopath. However, I've had that training. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a clinician. I've had the training, and we used to use it for our benefit in advancing criminal investigations, because if you knew the crime scene behavior was consistent with that of a psychopath, or the background of a suspect was consistent with a psychopath, that is going to change your approach going into the interview room, what you say, what you don't say, the appeals and approaches you make to that individual, and the things that you don't say to them. There are numerous factors that are not evident in the background of Bryan Kohberger that make it highly unlikely a qualified clinician would consider him a psychopath.
Tali in Israel, a question for Tara. We just sort of discussed this about the media lawyer today. The judge told him he needed to tone it down. But the bottom line question is, do you think they will allow cameras? Tara, what's your guess on this ultimately? Again, it went all the way up, I believe, to the Supreme Court. There hasn't been a decision made yet, but do you think in the end today, for example, there was a pool camera, but we only got it after the fact. Is it possible that it remains that way, a pool camera, and then we get to see the proceedings after each day? Does that make any sense or no?
Yeah, I mean, I understand your question. Hard to say right now. I mean, now that the Vallow trial had audio only and no camera, I think it was really the first time that I can recall where that's happened here, especially with these high profile cases. So, the judge wouldn't be doing anything that hasn't happened recently. Obviously, there are a lot of us, myself included, who would like to see the proceedings as they kind of unfurl and as they go along. We've also talked about, and this is from the Vallow trial, the reasons that were stated by the judge in making that decision on not allowing cameras in the courtroom. So those same considerations could be at play here. What I can tell you is I'm sure the judge is going to be hearing, 3 different perspectives, and we won't know, what position the defense and the prosecution ultimately take during those oral arguments. But back in like the OJ trial, it was so interesting because both the state and the defense wanted cameras, for very different reasons. State wanted the cameras because they wanted the public to have access to all this. And defense had come out with I can't remember which member of the dream team, but he was like, when our client is exonerated, we want the world to see the whole thing. So he's absolutely exonerated and walks free. Certainly very different what happened in the Vallow case with both the state and the defense saying, no, we don't want the cameras in the courtroom.
Cindy Hollenbeck, did anyone notice that Kohberger seemed annoyed when Judge was reading the charges? To you, Edwina, you've got a high-profile defendant. You had one in Lori Vallow Daybell. How do you advise your client before entering the courtroom as to how to behave?
Don't react. Period. End of story. No matter what happens, there's no eye rolling, there's no deep sighing. No matter what the commentary is behind you, you are not to have a visible reaction. You are to be respectful of the courtroom decorum because all eyes are on you. Everything that is happening will be interpreted right or wrong against you. And so there is, whether it's when charges are being read, when I'm preparing for a jury trial, I tell my clients, when those charges are read to the potential jurors, when they hear those charges, people are going to have a visceral reaction. You do not respond to that because it will be interpreted against you. And that is, while it's not legal training and a legal defense, it is part of the greater picture of being a litigator and a trial attorney, is making sure that your client in this particularly an atmosphere that most people will never experience in their entire life when they're sitting in the defendant's seat, that they are prepared to handle the inherent pressure of being in the literal hot seat.
Mac, this one's right in your wheelhouse. There's a lot of talk about tearing down this house at 1122 King Road before the trial. Is that a giant mistake? And by the way, I said levity instead of gravity. I've gained a bunch more moms while on this show who like to correct me. So apologies for that. But Mac, what do you say about this house?
Do not touch the house. You might even have an opportunity to take the jury over there. Mm-hmm. But if the defense needs to walk over and have anything looked at a second time, a third time, a fourth time, a fifth time, if they need to go over there and maybe even measure something, maybe they'll find something. But that crime scene should not in any way be altered.
I wasn't going to get to this question, Tara, but a bunch of people are asking, and here it is. Judge did mispronounce a couple of names. Was Judge apologizing for mispronouncing victims' names, or was he indicating that the case itself was difficult? Does this reflect poorly on him as a judge for this trial? If you're going to be presiding over a case, at least for optics purposes, it's probably important to know who the victims are, right?
It is. I mean, Judge is a very good judge. I can tell you that. And I think we've all been in circumstances and in situations where we're public speaking where we make a mistake or we mispronounce a name,
I never do that.
especially. Yeah, yeah, right. Especially with a high profile case. So, I'm sure it was inadvertent. I wouldn't read too much into that. I think we're all human and would make those errors. Now, I don't think it depreciates, his understanding of the gravity of the situation or the loss of life here. I don't think it signals any of that at all.
And Cindy in the Moscow Pullman area, I think Judge was breaking up, like choking up. That's what some people said. It's kind of an interesting comment because, Edwina, we don't ever really think of judges, at least I don't, as people. I think of them as these people who sit up on this perch and they're impartial, but they are human beings, and this is a very heavy case, right?
Exactly. I sympathize with both sides of this as a judge who is clearly well aware of the tremendous amount of public scrutiny this case has and the immense gravity of the loss of life here, and then just being human and being overwhelmed by that, or even the nervousness of the situation. No matter how many times you get up on that bench, it's a lot different when you have, it's completely different from their day to day. But then also, like, as much as my little defense attorney heart can in these situations, that hurt for the victims' families because, they're getting their moment and hope for justice in this case. So you're like, gosh, if there is anything that you want, it's their names to be spoken and to be heard. But I completely sympathize with just the humanity of being up there and having this pressure on you. So I understand both sides of it. Absolutely.
And just so everyone knows, we'll probably go about another 20 minutes, which we normally do, but I don't think we told Edwina that, and she has kids. So Edwina, if you have to hop off, no hard feelings, but we would love to have you.
Oh, no worries. I can make it work.
All right, great. Iris Hewlett says, do you really believe the mainstream media has been playing Kohberger as innocent until proven guilty? I've only seen the opposite, and that's probably why Judge gave a stern warning today of irreparable harm. That's interesting, just from my standpoint as being a guy in the media, and I can tell you that the media does have a tendency to jump on people, especially high-profile ones, and convict them in the court of public opinion. So that could be what is behind Judge's, not decision today, but how he spoke out against the motion by those media outlets. So getting on to some of the, more interesting, if you will, aspects of this case, and some of them were raised in this Dateline episode, and perhaps the biggest one of all, Jim Van Allen, is a revelation that he bought a K-bar on Amazon. Dateline referenced a single source reporting that it was purchased before he was even in Washington State, and then traveled to Washington State, apparently with this knife. What does that tell you, if anything?
If that knife is found to be the murder weapon, and I don't know they're ever going to match that particular purchase to the crime, but certainly there's a consistency there. Anybody that buys a murder weapon over the internet is foolish. And that's the lack of criminal experience that we're seeing in the investigative information that's coming out here. And the true effectiveness of a criminal is found in their experience. And this isn't reeking of experience to me. This looked like, and this is what we use to say that there probably isn't going to be a lot of similar type crimes in this defendant's history, because people learn from their mistakes. But there's a lot of mistakes here. There's a lot of murder 101 rules being broken that explain why he is facing what he's facing right now. Yeah, it's just that's beginner stuff.
Mac,
mistake.
Yeah, Mac, your take. You're the evidence queen. What about if he in fact purchased a K-bar knife, which is believed to have been the weapon used, with that sheath left behind? How big a deal is that?
Oh, it's tremendous. I mean, that's what we call a money tree. So not only do we have a receipt, we know you bought it prior. We know it's the exact knife that the sheath was left behind, the logo and all. I mean, that's just when you just high five each other in the office. But I will tell you one more thing to the point that I think, we're both trying to make. If I did not know who they arrested and all you gave me was the evidence, the car, the tickets, etc., I would think this person was young. I would think they were about 17 or 18. So again, it tells me his social standing. This is not somebody that I think is going to have a ton of friends. This is not somebody that can walk into a party and work the room and everybody go, God, that guy was awesome. This is probably somebody that's got very, very few friends, if any. He's probably got very few, if any, long-term dating relationships. This is somebody that probably socially got stunted in middle school.
Edwina, this is an interesting question based upon what you said about how the defense, how the state will go now and speak to the victims' families. Deep thinker Deb. So Joel, how does it work if two victims' families want the death penalty and the other two don't? I mean, ultimately the discretion is up to the state, I believe, but how do you explain this answer?
Yeah, you're exactly right. It is up to the state. Both respective sets in this scenario get to be heard by the prosecution, and realistically, if this were the scenario, then two sets are going to be I don't want to use the word pleased because that's like the least possible appropriate word here, but two families are going to be placated and the others aren't. And realistically, if it was the death penalty scenario, these families are going to experience years and years and years of appeals and no reprieve.
Yep.
But the prosecution gets to make that call at the end of the day.
A couple of other things that came up in the Dateline episode that were of interest. One I hadn't heard of. Some people had, but there was body cam footage of a young woman, presumably a University of Idaho student, who called police and said that she had a piece of luggage in her car. Items were removed and a pair of her panties were found on the passenger side. What's interesting about it is that is believed to be at a time when Bryan Kohberger was not in Moscow or Pullman, if the timeline is correct. Sheryl McCollum, is that a weird curveball?
Not to me. This case, to me, I would say single focused on the quadruple homicides. The other stuff that may or may not come out, who cares? That's not going to factor in right now. I believe in his past, he's probably been a peeping Tom. I think he's done some low level stuff. Maybe stole, somebody's underwear from a spend the night party when he was younger, but it's his friend's sister. Do I think, again, that he's done anything really significant? I do not. Again, we've already got his DNA. It's already in CODIS. Nothing is connecting. You've got other states that are looking for similar transactions. So far, nothing. So that to me checks out. Whether or not he put up a security camera, whether or not he did some little bogus burglary to try to scare somebody, again, that's a very juvenile thing. That's like somebody going, oh gosh, tonight I get to kiss her on the cheek. What the heck? I mean, that ain't a play, buddy. You're not Valentino. So if all you're doing is trying to steal a pair of underwear and put it on the seat so you're going to freak somebody out and scare her, you're a waste of time.
Tara, though, if in fact he was not in Idaho at that time or Washington State, does that suddenly give the defense something to work with to say, hey, look, this happened on this date, is right near the King Road home. Maybe there's another pervert out there, another stalker out there.
I mean, yes, in theory, it would, but but they still have to explain and provide a defense on the other things that the state is putting forward. So, you've got, it doesn't explain the cell tower data. It doesn't explain, the DNA, as Mac was just talking about. I mean, there's a lot there. And, it's hard. You asked earlier about a slam dunk case. There's, in my opinion, as a former prosecutor, there's really nothing that I would ever call a slam dunk case, because you've got humans on this jury and you don't know what one person may fixate upon. And so, I've had cases that I've taken to trial and I'm like, this is it. I mean, everything, dotted all the I's, crossed all the T's, like there's no way it's going to be a not guilty, walk away with a not guilty verdict, and vice versa. So, so it's one piece of it, but we have to look cumulatively at everything. And like I said, they may provide, that piece of evidence to kind of play around with, but what about the rest of it? And that's what a juror is going to be thinking. Well, explain away the DNA.
And Edwina, if you're Ann Taylor, his lead counsel, what are you doing today, tomorrow? What are you doing in this stage of the game?
You're in the trenches. I mean, you are preparing to go to trial until you're not going to trial. This is why litigation isn't for everybody, because it's all consuming. You have to go through, to be effective as a defense attorney, you have to go through everything. You have to chase down every possible defense, every avenue. Like, you're wondering, is there something to this underwear on the seat situation? Is there something that I can make of this? Is there not? I mean, these attorneys are in it, and this will be, this is it, why it's not for everybody. They'll be sidelined in their own lives as this case goes on, because a case of this magnitude requires that for you to be an effective defense attorney.
Like I tell my kids, 10,000 hours. That's what they say in that book, The Outliers. You get 10,000 hours to be great at anything. So,
right.
As my kids waste their time and I yell at them. Loaded Hot said, this one's for you, Mac. How often is DNA found under the nails of victims when they have defensive wounds?
It's going to be the first place I want to check. I mean, it's a go-to for sure. And in this situation, we know they fought him. They did. They grabbed at him. They scratched him. They may have even, whoever the killer is, may have skin, hair, saliva. You just never know. But it's absolutely a go-to for me, 100%.
Talia in Israel, Jim, for you, what are the chances that Bryan Kohberger will admit that he did this and relish in the act of telling the story?
Depending on future negotiations, plea deals that might come open, if part of the deal is he has to atone to what is alleged, that's different. He's going to admit that in court. This is not a bragging individual. This is not somebody that's going to call his best buddy. This is a type of crime that's very private, very personal, and you don't go bragging about it. Only one person can keep a secret. And if you're smart, you're going to keep your mouth shut. But this is not a glib, superficial, chatty, bragging type of guy. So I doubt very much he's going to relish telling this particular story. I've seen these guys on the witness stand, and they don't tell you the whole truth, but there's no way you're going to keep them off the witness stand because they have to be center stage type of thing. That's not who I'm seeing with this defendant.
And Jim, we saw body cam footage of a stop by the Washington State University campus police, and wasn't a wise guy. I wouldn't characterize him that way, but he was unintentionally giving the police officer a little bit of a hard time, asking a million questions, saying he's from a rural area, he doesn't understand the law. Could she explain the law? Could she explain it again? This goes to Adam Bluefire's question, who's watching us from Spain as well. Do you think Kohberger is dominating / bossing his legal team around to do things how he sees things, or that he may end up doing so during the trial, being the narcissist he is? I think I asked you this a little earlier, but just to clarify.
Again, the psychiatric labels of narcissism, psychopathy, psychopathic, psychotic are horribly misused and misunderstood by a lot of people. And they really don't help that much until you're looking at the traits that drove the behavior to commit a particular crime. And I would disagree that Bryan is a narcissist. I don't see, at the risk of offending anybody, if you want to see narcissism, watch any interview involving Donald Trump. That is the visual definition of narcissism. Those that do not look like that are not narcissists. Those that do are probably narcissistic or narcissists. And that's not who you're seeing from Bryan Kohberger.
By the way, Jim Van Allen lives in Canada, so he doesn't even vote. And if you want to send hate mail, send it to Jim Van Allen, not to me. We are apolitical on this show, but Jim was making a point, and it's a great point, and I will stand by it. Sally Vella for Mac. Remember the incompetent, all capitalized here, the incompetent Moscow police were there first, tromping, which I don't think is a word, all around the crime scene. There's plenty of evidence to prove it was contaminated. Someone called that evidence was left behind. Mac, I mean, I know you weren't there. The Moscow police took a lot of heat, but they did a fantastic job finding this guy. I'm very pro law enforcement myself. I will stick my neck out and say that. But what say you about the job they did from what you can tell from where you stand or sit?
What you were watching was absolute brilliance. When they put it out there, they were looking for this car and maybe they had a partial tag. They weren't sure. They already knew. They already had it. So again, for me, what you saw was this teamwork from the college law enforcement, the city, the county, the state, the FBI worked beautifully in concert with each other to catch this guy. Nobody posted anything on their social media that, hey, I was involved. I saw this tag and I caught the car at the college. Nobody did that. Everybody played their position beautifully, right down to the whisper stop, right down to the execution of the search warrant at his mom and daddy's house. Simultaneously, they hit his apartment. The whole time, they already had old boy. And we were saying, oh, they don't know what they're doing. But let me tell you something. If you go back and watch that chief of police and he's talking, there's a time or two where they ask him a question and he says he doesn't know, they're not certain. And then he grins just a little bit. That's what we would call a tale. He knew the whole time. It was beautiful.
I love the way Max speaks. It's like poetry, Southern poetry. To you, Jim Van Allen. By the way, before I get to Jim, Tara, I mean, if you're the defense team, you're going to lean into this messy crime scene collection narrative by the part of the Moscow PD, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're going to be looking at things like how they obtain their warrants and looking for violations of the Fourth Amendment and that, and trying to suppress evidence as a result of, Fourth Amendment violations. You're going to be looking and portraying possibly law enforcement as being sloppy, of missing things, and that's how you're going to start poking those holes if they decide to put on a defense. That's how they're going to poke holes in this case for the state that looks strong right now. But they might pick up on all those things and say they had no idea what they were doing. Look how they mishandled this. Look how they missed that. The crime scene. How did they handle the crime scene? Who was there? Who was walking in and out? Those types of things.
And Edwina, if you could just add to that, I mean, you were talking about how they're in it right now and how you've got to be in it. Just exactly how committed are you? I mean, I know you have a family, you have children. How do you, on a high profile case like this, it seems almost like you've got to be spending, 22 hours a day checking every single thing and leaving no stone unturned. How do you do that as a defense attorney?
You do it. You got to get it done, right? And I do want to add to what Chara said and respectfully disagree with Mac. Mac, I would never want you on one of my juries. I love your phrasing. It's amazing. But oh my gosh, I remember when this case got started, one of the first things that Moscow PD came out and said was that there was no threat to the community, no danger. And it's like, excuse me, what? You have 4 kiddos, not kiddos, but, young folks that are dead. And guess what? You don't have a suspect in custody, and you don't have a suspect that's killed themselves. And so what? There absolutely is a threat to the public safety at large. And I thought that was like red flag number 1, that this was that Moscow PD was very much out of their league in this situation. And that is, that's why that they had to bring in outside law enforcement entities, in my opinion. But yeah, to answer I just had to get that in there. But to answer your question, I mean, the only way to get through it is to get through it. You have to dig in, and it's like, I put my child to bed, and then I'm, burning the midnight oil, because you have to get it done. And there's no other way to do it other than to spend those hours and minutes, and, it's self-sacrifice.
My dad was a psychiatrist for over 40 years, and his favorite expression in the whole world, the intellectual, the expression he took away was "just do it" from Nike.
Yeah. Sums it up perfectly.
Can I in for just a second? I would never argue with either one of these legal geniuses. Honestly, I was watching when he said there was no threat, and then said they didn't know about the car for sure. They maybe only had a partial tag. I believe they were trying to draw him out, because I think they already knew this person had an ego and were trying to get him to respond to them in some way. That's what I thought he was doing. I don't think he was playing the public. I don't think he was taking it not as seriously as he should. But I thought that he believed if he said, oh, there's no threat, that he might either through social media or some other means contact them, is what I thought was happening.
Mac, I missed the first part of that, but I was going to ask you about the 2 traffic stops on the way back home from Wash. Do you think those were on purpose? The FBI denies that they were, but what do you think?
Yeah, 100%.
Yes.
It's what we call a whisper stop. So what would happen is, if they wanted to make sure this is Bryan Kohberger driving his car, does he have any scratches? Do you see anything in plain view? Does he have the knife on the back seat? Does he have a bloody shirt stuck between the bucket seats? That's what you would do that for. If the FBI is tailing him, and let's say somehow they lose him, they may get state police, catch him, stop him for us so we can catch back up to him. Let's say they had to stop for an emergency restroom stop or something, and he was going to get 7 minutes down the road. They would do a whisper stop. And again, the FBI might have denied it, but Moscow didn't deny doing it.
Kathleen Alfano, for you, Jim, how is it not the work of a serial killer?
Well, serial killer is a law enforcement classification of different types of murders that are out there. It's one type. Serial killings are two or more individuals killed at different locations with an emotional cooling off period in between the murders. The emotional cooling off period can be days, weeks, months, or years. 4 people killed at the same geographic location with no emotional cooling off period is a massacre under law enforcement classification jargon. Doesn't matter. There's no legal significance to this at all. It's how we start paring down a case and trying to understand what is different about this case from that case, what is similar in case A to case B. Most serial killing tends to be sexual in nature. They tend to be committed by psychopathic personalities, and we could do a whole segment on psychopathy and why Bryan isn't a psychopath or a psychopathic guy. Many serial killings involve torture. There was none in this one. There are no, to my knowledge, any other crimes in any U.S. or North American jurisdiction that are similar to the Idaho student murders in terms of evidentiary links, DNA links, similar criminal behavior, similar activity done to the victims, or unique criminal methods used. It's a massacre. It's not a serial killer.
And Jim, be careful what you offer. Now I'm going to have you come back and do an hour or two on what you just discussed. Tater Tot also wants to know, do you think he's a victim of bullying, Jim? And a lot of people are victims of bullying. Why do some people snap and start killing as a result?
Everybody gets bullied growing up at some point. Girls are subject to other mean girls. Guys are subject to bullying by tough guys in school. If you have any deformity, appearance issue, acne, you're probably going to get bullied. Dealing with bullying is a part of the human experience. Some people are more resilient than others and deal with it better and leave it behind and move on with their lives, and other people can't. Sometimes the bullying is intense and they rebel to it. Was he bullied? Oh, probably. But I don't know that has any bearing on this particular crime or would have any significance at the trial.
Little known fact: Jim Van Allen's favorite movie is Mean Girl. No, I'm just joking. He didn't admit that. One last thing, and then we'll wrap it up. I promise. So, in the Dateline episode, I thought this was interesting, and I'm not a profiler. I'm not a crime scene person. I'm just a podcast host. That's it, and not a very smart one on top of it. But anyway, something I thought was interesting was Madison Mogen is obviously a victim. Well, in this episode, they also interviewed a woman from DeSales University. She said that Bryan would always stare at her, and they asked if she thought it was creepy, and she responded saying it's really just a Bryan thing, but he knew this, and she knew this, that her name is Madison also. Jim, is there any possibility, because we still really don't know the target, that he had some sort of affinity to the name Madison for some bizarre reason or another, or am I reading way into that? And by the way, Papa Rogers, we're going to discuss with Kerry Rawson on Wednesday, because a lot of people have asked about that. But what about the name Madison? Could that be some sort of trigger?
Never seen it. In hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of murders, I've never seen a significant name link that you have to go kill someone for their name. We have seen victims selected based on a certain a physical characteristic, an appearance to another significant individual in the killer's life. He could be going through a very conflicted relationship with a female boss or a female he's in a relationship with, and displace that anger towards an innocent victim. We've seen that, but never on the basis of a name.
By the way, a lot of people are saying, hey, how does Jim know all this? Because Jim has put in his 10,000 plus hours, so he knows a hell of a lot more than most of us, as does Mac, as do our attorneys. Mac, final question, and then we will conclude. But why the hell did he leave the sheath behind, and how important is that touch DNA?
Inexperience. He was caught in the moment. And maybe when he entered that room, he wasn't expecting two people to be in there. His target clearly to me was on the third floor. He went there specifically to the third floor first. There's no doubt about it. But it doesn't matter what you're planning. If it's a wedding or a murder, something is not going to go the way you have run through it in your mind. That's just the truth. So maybe he wasn't expecting somebody to scream. Maybe he wasn't expecting them to fight back. Maybe he thought it was going to be like TV. I'm going to stab her once in the chest and that's going to be it. And that is not what happened here. It was a mistake, just like everything else he did. Again, I agree with Jim. I don't think he picked somebody based off a name any more than I think he picked the number 13. But if he did, it's again because he is very immature.
Mac, are either of your two college-age kids going to become law enforcement people?
My son is an investigator right now for the state public defender's office for his internship, and hopefully he'll start full-time there once he graduates. And my daughter's studying criminal justice, and she has a kind of a natural gift for profiling. So we'll see.
That's because of her mama. I love it. Edwina Elcox, another mama. She's a criminal defense attorney from Boise, Idaho. She's been practicing criminal law for the majority of her career. She has experience as both a prosecutor and defense attorney. And she previously represented a little-known client named Lori Vallow Daybell. Shaquille O'Neal, who, as everyone knows, I'm convinced is the actual Shaq, who just goes by this pseudonym here. He says, I'd never want to be the judge on this type of high-profile case. He will also endure a lot of pressure, followed by, I wonder if Judge is the first judge in the Judge family. Edwina Elcox, we always talk about the pressure on the attorneys. What about the pressure on a judge in a high-profile case like this to get it all right?
Yeah, well, you have the inherent media scrutiny, but then also as a judge, you have to realize that every decision that you are making in a case, every ruling is going to be potentially scrutinized by the appellate court. And so when you are trying to get everything right and apply the law, because you don't want to be called out at the appellate level and have a case sent back down because you messed something up. That's an incredible amount of pressure. Incredible.
Jim Van Allen. He is a certified profiler and experienced threat and risk assessment specialist. He has over 30 years. He was with the Ontario Provincial Police, 15 of which were spent running the OPP criminal profiling unit. Leona Leone, Jim, how sick are these women sending love letters? Talk about delusional. Yikes. Apparently, Bryan Kohberger is getting love letters in his jail cell. What is the psychology? Why don't you profile these women for a moment? What's going on here and your final thoughts, Jim?
Yeah, they're different. Those aren't normal relationships. That's not normal courting type behavior or attraction. Probably a little notoriety there. Displaced mothering. Can't do any better for you right now off the top of my head, Joel. Stay away from girls that write murder suspects' letters in jail.
Good.
That's my advice to young males.
Good advice from Jim Van Allen. Cheryl McCollum, she's a legend. She's an Emmy Award winning CSI from CBS 46's CSI Atlanta. She's the director of the Cold Case Investigative Research Unit. She's a writer for CrimeOnline. She's buddies with Nancy Grace. She holds a master's degree. Her kids are going to be exceptional law enforcement officers. Mac, what are your closing thoughts where we stand right now and where we are headed? Is this guy toast, as they say?
I think he's absolutely toast. I think if you look at the totality of what we already know they have, from the goggles to the gloves to the receipts to the sheaths to the DNA to the phone pinging to the traffic tickets to the car being on video, by the time they go through his social media and they go through his computer searches and they found whatever they did in his apartment, from blood on the sheets to maps to notes, I think it's going to be unbelievable what they have against him.
Tara Malik, she's an Idaho licensed attorney practicing in state and federal court in business and commercial litigation. She has experience in both civil and criminal law. She sits on the boards of different things, but most importantly, she has an awesome dog and posts pictures of that dog. So she's all right in my book. We talked about the defense, Tara, Edwina did, but in terms of the state, what are they doing tonight, tomorrow, Wednesday, into next week? What's going on with them right now?
Well, they've got this ongoing requirement to turn over discovery, and I know we've touched on that. I think they've turned over thousands and thousands of documents already. They have a continuing obligation. So if they get more reports, additional reports, usually like forensic type of reports, which sometimes are delayed and come later if they're testing additional materials, they're going to be working on getting that discovery out. They're going to be lining up their expert witnesses. They're going to start preparing and looking for the holes in their case. And with any high profile case like this, where the stakes are high, I would expect to see some more motion practice as well. So not only this gag order and motion to compel that we're going to be dealing with here, seeing the attorneys deal with here, but I'm sure there's going to be some other motions as well. And we'll see if there's, like I said, any sort of Fourth Amendment sort of claim where, they're alleging law enforcement violated, his constitutional rights and got a warrant because of something they shouldn't have been doing. So the prosecution's definitely got their work cut out for them from here on forward.
A quick shout out to both Kerry Rawson and Kevin Fixler, who are both all over the story. The Fix, who's with the Idaho Statesman and investigative reporter, my colleague in the hearing, said members of the Gonzalez family, as well as Madison Mogen's mom and stepfather, were inside the hearing as well. So the families of the victims showing up in full force. And of course, we are thinking of them as they are the obvious victims in this horrific crime that occurred back in November. A quick programming note for everyone. Tomorrow, 7 p.m. Eastern time, we switch gears a little bit. We're going back to the Dan Markell murder case, the FSU professor who went to Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law, and then was murdered by a pair of hitmen who are now in prison. But his ex-wife's family, the ex-brother-in-law, is set to go on trial, and the ex-wife, there's one prosecutor who thinks that there are over 100 reasons to indict her, and we're going to go through that list, continue to go through it tomorrow night, 12:30 p.m., a lunch live on Wednesday. Right now, we've got Kerry Rawson, who I just mentioned. She's coming on along with Jennifer Koffendorfer, former FBI agent, and Brian Enton is scheduled to come on the show, but he is in Idaho. He might be flying back, so I don't know for sure. I will let you know tomorrow. But if we don't get Brian on Wednesday, we will get him soon enough. It's Monday. We got through it. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to Edwina, whose feed we just lost. Love you, America. Love you, Boise. Love you, Canada. Oh, Canada. Love you, Atlanta. And we will see you soon enough. Thank you, guys.
Thank you.